attended the International Shroud of Turin Conference, and this was held at the St. Augustine Institute in St. Louis, Missouri, which is where I used to live. So before my husband retired, and we moved out to Southwest Missouri, we were in we were in St. Louis, Missouri, and so it was an amazing experience. And so tonight, I just want to share with you about the experience, share with you some things that I learned, and then as well as some surprises. There were some really surprising things that I noticed at the conference, all good things. I mean, it was just really amazing. So now a lot of you are familiar with my fascination with the Shroud of Turin. I've done a couple of podcasts about it. And I've found that many of you actually feel exactly the same way I do, that you've also been fascinated with the Shroud of Turin. Some of you for many, many years, like I have. And so many of you, including me, we believe, along with millions of other people, that the Shroud of Turin is actually the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ. And there it is. There's a picture of it. So I am going to do like a little bit of introduction to the shroud in case we've got any newcomers here tonight. Anybody that might not be familiar with the shroud. So I'm going to kind of give an overview. But that is the shroud. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what exactly that is, because for somebody not familiar with the shroud, they're looking at that and they're like, what in the world is that? And there's a close-up of the face on the shroud. And then we'll be talking about what that is on the other side in a few minutes. So anyway, so many of you know that back in February, I did a podcast about the shroud, and there is the thumbnail. If you missed it, you can go back and find this on my YouTube channel. This was from February 12th, 2025. And so I did a full-length podcast about the shroud, and I just put out all of the evidence that I've been able to find online and through some other research in defense for the Shroud of Turin, that it absolutely could be the authentic burial shroud of Jesus Christ, the cloth that Jesus's body was wrapped in when he was laid in the tomb. And I really believe that it is, and there's so much compelling evidence that shows that it actually could be. So anyway, I did this podcast back in February, and it was very well received. It got a lot of views. And then right after the podcast, I was contacted by a man named Joe Marino. Now, I did not know Joe Marino at the time. So when he told me that he had watched the podcast and he enjoyed it, and that he had been researching and studying the shroud for 40 years. And so anyway, I was intrigued. We wrote back and forth a couple of times. He was very, very humble. So I didn't know who he was in the shroud world. But I had a sneaking suspicion. So I did a little research, and I found out that, you know what, Joe Marino is one of the biggest names, the biggest authorities in the world on the Shroud of Turin today. So at first I was shocked that, he watched my podcast. Then I was really kind of terrified that, maybe I had said something incorrect. I think I even asked him, did I say anything incorrect? And he said, there was something, but I forgot what it was. So I have no idea. So I can't help you with that. But anyway, so I thought I would take a chance. And I asked him if he would be willing to come onto my Voices show and let me interview him, just like I have just asked Atangelo Grasso. Hope I'm saying your name right. He, much to my amazement and shock, he agreed. And so then in April, I had Joe Marino on my show and did an interview with him. It was a really great show. And he does a lot of interviews about the shroud. But I think I took a little bit of a different twist on it. So I'm not going to tell you anything more. I did read his book, so I knew a lot about his life. And so I pulled something out from his book that I think you will find very, very interesting. So if you missed that, please go back and look at that. That was on April 8th, and you will find these on my YouTube channel. All right. So while I was researching for my first podcast about the shroud, I discovered that this was back in January of this year, and I discovered that there was going to be this International Shroud Conference in St. Louis, not only in St. Louis, but in the little municipality of Florissant, which is just north of St. Louis. And now that's where I actually grew up. I lived there through high school and lived there for many, many years in this little tiny town of Florissant. And you know what else? When I started talking to Joe Marino, he grew up in Florissant. So when I'm reading his books, he's talking about hanging out in this bookstore in Jamestown Mall, which was where I hung out when I was in high school. So anyway, it got to the point where it was too many coincidences to be coincidence. You know what I mean? So I had already been planning on attending the conference, and that just clinched it. So I bought my ticket, and so that was last week. And it was wonderful, and that's what I'm going to be talking to you about tonight. But before I tell you about the conference, for those of you who might be new to the show, and then there might be some people here tonight who are not familiar with the Shroud. So I want to give you kind of just a quick overview of what the Shroud is, why I believe it's so important, why there are millions and millions of people in the world who believe that this is the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ himself. So I want to start off with that. So for a lot of people my age, so I'm in my late 50s, and a lot of people my age learned about the Shroud from a documentary. It was a television documentary. And here's the cover for that. It was The Silent Witness. Is this the image of Jesus Christ? And you can see the face from the Shroud on the picture right here. So this was a television documentary that came out in 1978. And now back in 1978, there was, we probably had 5 television channels back then. There was no cable. There was absolutely no internet. So if you can imagine. So there were 5 television stations. So for something interesting sounding like a documentary of is this an image of Jesus Christ? For that to come onto one of our 5 channels, a lot of people watched that. So for a lot of people my age and a little bit older, this is how we were introduced to the Shroud, from this documentary that was on television way back in 1978. Now in 1978, I was 11 years old. So I was a kid, right? But it was so fascinating. This documentary blew my mind. And so from that documentary, even at that young age, I was absolutely convinced 100% that this Shroud is the authentic Shroud of Jesus Christ. And I have been ever since. So what evidence was brought forth in this documentary that was so compelling that people like me would actually believe this crazy idea that we could actually have the Shroud, the cloth that wrapped Jesus's body in his tomb? I mean, that's insane, right? So let me give you a quick summary of the most compelling evidence. Okay. So let me just start off with some details about the Shroud. So here it is again. This is the Shroud. And so for those of you who are not familiar with it, let me kind of explain what's going on here. So this is actually a huge cloth. It is 14 feet long. Okay, so it looks really tiny right there, but it's 14 feet long, 3.5 feet wide, and it is made on herringbone patterned flax linen. So it's a piece of cloth, okay? And there is an image of a man who appears to have been crucified on this. Now, I know it's hard to see, it's very faint, but if you look right here, like right across from where my finger is, that from that point on down, we see the front of this man. Okay, so his head is right there, okay, right in the middle, and then you can see his chest, and then his hands crossed in front of him, his arms and hands, and then his legs and feet down below that. And from this point upward, we see an image of the back of this same man upside down. So his head's right here. Then you can see his shoulders and his back, okay? And then his legs in the bottom of one of his feet right there. So I know it's hard to see. I'm going to be showing you some better pictures of it. So that is the Shroud of Turin. And I will say that it is the most studied archaeological artifact in history. The absolute most studied archaeological artifact, not just religious artifacts. Of all archaeological artifacts that have ever been found in the history of humankind, this Shroud is by far the most studied. Hundreds of cross-disciplinary scholars have done all different kinds of research on this Shroud. They have published scholarly research of all different people of all different beliefs and faiths. So it isn't just Christians trying to prove that this is the Shroud of Jesus. We had many skeptics. And also, very interestingly, and you will understand this if you're not familiar yet with the Shroud, by the end of this podcast, you will understand a little bit more why. But a lot of skeptics have come to start researching and looking into this Shroud and have been convinced by their research that it is actually the authentic shroud of Jesus Christ. And that includes Dr. Jeremiah Johnston, who was at the conference. And you may have heard of him. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about him tonight. So, all right. So this shroud, this piece of cloth has been so studied that they have actually coined a new term for the study of the shroud, and it is called syndonology. Syndonology, and that means simply the study of the Shroud of Turin. Okay, and it comes from the Italian word sindone, which means shroud. And I've got an interesting story about that word sindone, because one of the presenters at the show or at the conference, Randy Altig, who is he is a movie director, and who has just put out last year, I believe, a documentary, and a new documentary about the shroud, so you can look that up. And so anyway, he was talking about one of his first experiences learning about the shroud. He was visiting Italy, and he was actually at a shroud event, or a shroud, like a display, and in Turin. So he wasn't able to see the actual shroud, but he was able to go to, there's probably like a museum there. And so he kept seeing this word sindone, but he doesn't speak Italian. And so he kept thinking it said sindone, sin done. And so he told his friend, he said, wow, that's so incredible that they say sin done. That's what Jesus did on the cross. He knew that it was an image of Jesus. He said sin done. And his friend, who spoke Italian, just laughed at him and said, no, Randy. That word is sindone, and it means shroud. But you know what? I think it also means sin done. Yes, because our sin is done through the blood of Jesus Christ. So that was awesome. I love that. All right. So, of course, there have been many, many, many naysayers throughout the years who believe the shroud is a hoax. It's a forgery from the Middle Ages. But the truth is that even today, after all of these decades and decades of being studied and all the technology that we have at our disposal today, nobody has ever been able to figure out how the image was put on the shroud. Okay, so here's how the shroud works. I want to show you this painting so you can see how it would work and why there are these two images of a man, front and back, on the shroud. So you see how the body would have been laid out. The shroud, the end of the cloth would go at the end of the person's feet, and then they would lay the body on the shroud and then wrap the shroud up over the top of them. And so that's why on the shroud you see the front image at the bottom, and then upside down image of the back of the person up on the top of the shroud. So very interesting how they would do that, and then wrap the bodies. And then they would, after they wrapped the shroud around the body, they would use strips of cloth to tie that tightly against the body. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about the history of the shroud. So the first verifiable appearance of the shroud was in the 14th century in France, so in 1354. So we know where the shroud has been. Okay, we have kept track of it, and it has been protected since 1354. Okay, so we go all the way back to 1354 in our knowledge of where this piece of cloth has been. There are mentions of it, and perhaps paintings that are older than that show that it was around, it was being displayed. But the first verifiable appearance was in 1354. There was a fire then later in 1532, and it was moved to Turin, Italy in 1578. That is where the shroud is today. So today you cannot see the shroud. Of course, the more sunlight hits it, they say it's fading. They want to make sure and keep it very protective. So today the shroud is still in Turin, Italy. It is protected in a box filled with argon gas. It actually belongs to the Pope right now. And so it is at the Pope's discretion when to show it. And generally every 10 years or so, the Pope will have a showing so that lucky people can come and actually see the shroud. So the last time that happened was in 2015. So, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to go see the shroud? I don't know that I would ever be able to do that, but it would be a dream come true. All right. So one of the biggest shocking findings about the nature of the shroud happened back in 1898 when it was photographed by an Italian lawyer named Seconda Pia. And Seconda Pia took I believe the very first photograph of the shroud. And so for those of you who are old enough like me to remember before digital photography, when you took a photograph, you used to have a little negative, which was an inverted image where all the white things would be black and all the black things would be white. And then, yeah, it's a whole process. But anyway, so you'd have an inverted image, which was the negative that they would use then to print the pictures from. So that's how the photography worked back for Seconda Pia in 1898. Now, photography was only invented in 1822, so photography was still a brand new thing at that time. So Secondo Pia took a picture of the shroud, and then as he developed the negative and took a look at it, he almost fainted in shock, because here is what he saw. Okay, so this is the picture of the face on the shroud. So if you just look at the shroud, at the face area, that is what you will see. It's very light, very faint. So, but you can pick out through the middle, you see the nose going down, the eye, probably can see the eyes on the either side of the nose, and then the brow, the hairline kind of going up above it. And then under the nose is like a mustache, and then a mouth and a beard, if you can see that. Now I'm going to show you the negative the Seconda Pia viewed. Look at that. Does that not look more like an actual face? And the reason why is because the light is shining on the different places of the face where light would more naturally shine if you were just looking at somebody in real life, right? On the nose and the cheeks and the forehead, okay, and the lips. Okay, so when he just about fainted when he saw that, because what he realized, what this means is that the actual shroud is a negative. It's a negative image. And so that when you look at a negative of a negative, you see the positive, right? So it has been a little enhanced a little bit, but on the right-hand side, that is the positive image that you would get if you look at a negative of this. Does that make sense? It's kind of complicated. But anyway, so this is just incredible, because remember, a lot of people, there have always been naysayers of the shroud, and people who believe that who say the shroud, oh, it's just a hoax. So somebody painted it. You know, remember, the first verifiable finding of the shroud was back in the 1300s. So people have been fixated on, oh, it's a medieval forgery, right? Somebody in the Middle Ages painted this thing, right? So, but the thing is, photography has only existed since 1822. Before photography, nobody even knew what a negative was. So no forgery artist would have any idea how to create a negative. So it was quite a mystery. So, okay. So then let's skip ahead several hundred years and to 1978. And let me show you this first. So this is the negative of the whole body. Okay. So on the left, you see the front, and then on the right is the back. So look at it. Wow. Isn't that amazing? That looks so much different than the actual shroud image. So because it just looks three-dimensional, right? Just amazing. It's so miraculous. All right. So in 1978, there was the Pope allowed, I'm not sure if the Pope owned it at that time. Anyway, so the owner of the shroud allowed a group of 50 scientists to study the shroud. He gave them, they were given 120 hours of access to do all these different tests of the shroud. And so this was called the Shroud of Turin Research Project, STURP for short. And so this involved those 50 scientists. And so they all traveled to Italy to study the shroud. And so they were able to do all these different kinds of tests, except carbon dating. So they were not allowed to carbon date the shroud at that time, because in order to carbon date, you have to actually cut some pieces out of the cloth. And so they did not want that to be done and damage the shroud at that time. So, but they were able to gather all of this data. And then they studied all the data for 3 years. And at the end of this, they put out an official statement. And here are their conclusions. This is what they said. We can conclude for now that the shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist. The bloodstains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin. The image is an ongoing mystery, and until further chemical studies are made, perhaps by this group of scientists or perhaps by some scientists in the future, the problem remains unsolved. So you get what they said here? It's not a painting. So they studied it and they found there is absolutely not a painting. There is no paint. There are no pigments, dyes, or stains on this cloth. So it's not a painting. It is a real man. There is real human blood on this piece of cloth. We have no idea how it was made, though. So that was what they found. That is their official statement. So, and when they had gone out there, these are scientists, right? So they assumed when they set up and were on their way to Italy, they assumed that they would be able to find evidence that this is a hoax, it's a forgery, the first afternoon, right? That's what they were joking about it. Oh, we're going to figure it out in 2 hours, and then we're going to have gotten a free trip to Italy. Then we can all go to the bars and drink. That's what they were doing. Well, they used the whole 120 hours to study the shroud, and they still could not figure out what. And still today, no one has been able to figure out exactly how that image is on the shroud. All right. So that was in 1978. All right. So what I want to tell you is some of the most compelling evidence that STURP found when they were studying the shroud. Let's talk about the cloth itself. So the cloth is, as I said, it is made from flax linen. It is a stitching that was unknown in the Middle Ages. So it has this herringbone pattern, okay? And so remember, all these people are the naysayers. They're like, oh, it's a forgery from the Middle Ages, right? But it uses a kind of stitching, this herringbone pattern, that was not used in the Middle Ages at all. But when it was used? It was used in Judea in the 1st century, of course, where and when Jesus was crucified. So, and it was woven on an oversized loom, which was also common in the Middle East in the 1st century, but extremely rare during the Middle Ages. So that's just the first of many, many reasons why it is very unlikely that this cloth is a forgery. So mineralogy, let's talk about that. There were particles of dirt and limestone that could be traced back to Jerusalem, that were found on the soles of the feet of the figure on the shroud, and on the left knee, and on the nose. There was also dirt on the feet under the blood stains. So you will see as I go through all of this evidence how everything perfectly matches the story of the crucifixion that we learn in the Bible. Okay, so it is just so amazing how everything matches up exactly. So if you know the story, Jesus, as he walked through the Via Dolorosa carrying his cross on the way to Golgotha, so that dirt that is on his feet would have been, as he is making that journey to the place where he was crucified, he probably fell. Okay, that's why they asked somebody, Simon of Cyrene, to carry his cross for him. So when he fell, he likely would have gotten the dirt on his knee. They would tie the criminals or whoever was going to be crucified. They would tie their arms to the crossbeam of the cross. So if they fell, they would not be able to put their hands out and stop the fall. And so they would, he would have landed on his face. And so the dirt on his nose could have been from that. So then there would not have been the blood on his feet until the crucifixion process. And so then the blood would be on top of the dirt that they found on his feet. So interesting. There was also traces of myrrh and aloes on the shroud, which we are told in the Bible were used during his burial. Okay, so let's talk about the pollen. There is a pollen fingerprint. They found microscopic pieces of pollen in the fibers of the shroud. Some of those were from flowers that are indigenous to Jerusalem, and were also from Jerusalem flowers that would have been blooming in April, which is when Jesus was crucified. So interesting. I mean, just think about it. If this were a forgery from somebody in the Middle Ages in Europe, okay, where they found it in the 1300s, how in the world would they know that, I better go take a trip to Jerusalem in April and gather up a bunch of pollen to rub into the fibers? No, this is not a forgery. Okay, so let's talk about the body itself. Let me show you this picture. Let me get a little bit bigger. Okay, so you can see the image. This is the negative image of the shroud on either side. And in the middle is an artist's rendition of the body that is shown on the shroud with all of the blood stains and the markings on the body on the shroud. Okay, so this is fascinating. So we see the crucifixion wounds in the wrists and in the feet. Okay, so the fact that the crucifixion wounds are on the wrists is very significant, because if you remember, most of the images that we see, the paintings, especially paintings from the Middle Ages, they always show the nails going through the palms of the hand. And one of the reasons why there was confusion in the translation from the original language, because the word for palm and wrist are very similar. Okay, and so that's why we had this confusion. Okay, and so for many years, people still today, we see images, even contemporary images, where the nail is going through the palm of Jesus's hands. But we know now that the Roman crucifixions, they did not put the nails through their palms, because the muscles and the bones in the hand are not strong enough to hold the weight of a human body. And so if they tried to do the nails in the palms, the nails would rip through the palms. I know it's gruesome. So what they would do instead, they would put the nails through these two bones in your wrist, okay, because they would be able to carry the weight of the body. So if this were a forgery, the forger would have no way to know that, and they would have put the blood markings in the palms, as what you normally would see in paintings of that era. Okay, so another proof, and another thing that a forger would not have known, and another proof of this, is that when the nail, or when this part of your wrist would be pierced, it causes the thumb to withdraw like this. And so you can see on the image, no thumbs are visible, and that's because those thumbs have been withdrawn. Okay, then we also see the oval wound in the right side, as we are told in the Bible that one of the Roman soldiers pierced Jesus's side with a spear. Then we see all of the scourge marks all over the body. All of those long marks are from the scourging. And so these are done with a Roman whip. And so this was the defining moment when I watched that documentary in 1978. When the man who was narrating at that point in the documentary, he had a life-size image of the shroud, and he also had an actual Roman flagrum, which is this Roman whip, these whips that were used for the scourging. So it's like a little handle, and then they have three strips of leather coming out, and then at the end of each strip would have these two metal balls. And so as those metal balls would hit the skin of the person being scourged, they would grab the skin and pull the skin back. It was just a terrible torture device, actually. So the most striking thing in this documentary, and in my podcast, I showed a little clip of this from back in February. So if you'd like to go back and look at that, actually, you can find on YouTube the entire documentary from 1978. So The Silent Witness. So yeah, I recommend going back and watching that. It's fascinating. But anyway, so he was showing this flagrum with those two little balls, and he was able to match them up to the wounds on the body, on the shroud. Exactly. Like you could see that those two little metal balls on the wounds on the person on the shroud. So how insane is that? They also were able to tell that that the body, who I believe is Jesus, on the shroud, he was scourged by two different soldiers, one on each side. They can tell that from the angles of these scourge marks. Okay, and then the final thing I want to talk about is the blood. Okay, and the blood, I already mentioned it before, that the blood that is on the shroud is human blood. It has hemoglobin, human albumin. They can tell that it is type AB. That is what I had heard. Now, one of the presenters last week said, nah, because of the way blood ages, they really can't tell for sure if it's AB. So anyway, I just have to correct that. It's evidently not for sure. So also we see all the blood stains, okay? And they all, the patterns and the behavior of the blood stains, they match what forensic science would say blood patterns would do to a body that had been crucified and then laid in a tomb, okay, because of just the patterns of the blood. And I also saw a very good presentation, where somebody analyzed the patterns of the blood and the angles of the blood that had run down Jesus's arms. Very, very fascinating stuff. And from that, they were able to determine the body postures. There were several different body postures that he had as he was on the cross, and he was lifting himself up to breathe as he was on the cross. Just fascinating stuff. All right. And then also, interestingly, one more thing about the blood. So the wound in the chest has blood, but it also has water, which is this fluid that would come from fluid buildup in the chest. And remember, we are told in the scriptures that when Jesus' side was pierced, blood and water flowed out. So, wow, wow, wow. So interesting. Okay, so the documentary that I saw in 1978 was basically just giving all of this information that the STURP scientists had discovered. So it was really just telling us about their findings. And like I said, I was convinced at 11 years old, this is the shroud of Jesus. And I have always been convinced. But in 1988, something else happened. Okay, so remember the STURP findings, all that came out. That was 1978, and that was when the documentary came out. But so 10 years later, 1988, the Pope allowed the shroud to be tested again, but this time he allowed some pieces of the cloth of the shroud to be cut out so it could be carbon dated. Okay, so they cut out some sections of the shroud. They did the carbon dating process, and do you know what they found out? All right, so here are the three gentlemen who presented the findings. Do you see the dates up there? These are the dates after they carbon dated the fabric from the shroud. They found that the shroud was from a time period between 1260 and 1390 AD. Yeah, and then they put a little exclamation point at the end just for emphasis. So you know what that means. You know what that means. Okay, that means that it can't be the shroud of Jesus Christ. Can't be the shroud of Jesus Christ, because if it were the shroud of Jesus, then it would have to be dated from the 1st century, approximately 33 AD, right? So at that point, this is 1988, the world assumed, well, I guess it was a forgery after all, and the world kind of forgot about the shroud. A lot of people, okay? The shroud must not be real. They were right all along, all the naysayers. So, but over the years, in fact, the decades since then, a lot of weirdness has come into light about just some conflicts of interest of the scientists, the people who did the carbon dating. We found that there were people who were actually placing bets that it was going to be a forgery. They did not follow some protocols they were supposed to follow. There were definitely some agendas going on. So, and there are a lot of people have come out with a lot of different theories why this carbon dating process was not correct. So, but the best theory, the most compelling theory, in my opinion, came from Mr. Joe Marino himself and his wife, Sue. And that was the theory of the cloth repair. That the section of cloth that they took for the carbon dating was actually a section that was not from the original shroud, but was from a section that had been very expertly repaired at some point, probably between 1260 and 1390. Okay, and so Joe Marino and his wife discovered this as they were going over photographs, very high resolution quality photographs of the weave pattern in the area where they took the cloth for the testing, and they could see that there were differences in the weave pattern. So it was not from the original cloth of the shroud. So in my opinion, carbon date has been completely debunked, and I don't think a lot of people really believe that anymore. Of course, there's always going to be naysayers that just don't want to believe that it is the shroud of Christ, and so they're going to believe whatever they want. But anyway, yeah, I don't think that the carbon dating is true at all. So I don't think that we need to listen to that anymore. So, but back in 1988, carbon dating was and still is considered very, very reliable. And so a lot of people just kind of forgot about the shroud. And this event got a lot of press. But over the years, as more evidence has surfaced that, there were a lot of problems with that carbon dating process. That has not gotten a lot of press until now. And things are really changing now. And it is so good to see. And so anyway, I'll be talking more about that in a little bit when I describe the conference, which I'm going to do. But I want to tell you a few more things. So the other thing that they did not talk about in that 1978 documentary that I found so interesting that I learned about just this year as I was doing research for my first podcast was this face cloth, which is called the Sudarium of Oviedo. Let me show you. there. Yeah, the sudarium. Sudarium means face cloth, face handkerchief. Okay. And so this would have been the face cloth that was wrapped around Jesus's face when he was pulled down off of the cross. Okay. So this is located in this is in Spain. Okay, so this is not with the shroud. It's some other place. But here are the two reasons why this is so compelling to me. So the first thing is, so I watched a BBC documentary about this. And it's very interesting because if you take an image of the shroud from the facial area and you line it up with this face cloth, the blood stains, they match very strikingly. I think it's something like 98% match or something. Don't quote me on that because I am not sure. But anyway, it is striking how much they match. So much so that the people that were in this documentary, the scientists that were studying this, said the only way this could happen, that you could have a match that is this close, is if this face cloth was indeed on the same person who was in that shroud, the Shroud of Turin. So the only way that could happen is if this face cloth and the Shroud of Turin were wrapped around the same body, right? That doesn't mean it was Jesus, but it means they were on the same body. So why is that so important? It's so important because remember, the Shroud of Turin, we only know where it has been since the 1300s. Well, this has been protected in a safe place, in the same place, since the 5th century. 5th century. So that gets us way, way closer to the actual time period of Jesus Christ. So very, very interesting. All right. Okay, there's been a little bit recently, even as recently as 2022, I talk about this in my podcast from February, and that is that there is this new way of testing fibers, like linen fibers, called wide-angle X-ray scattering waxes testing. And so when they tested some of the shroud fibers in this way, using this method, it took them to exactly 1st century, exactly the time period that it would need to be the shroud of Jesus Christ. Okay, so last thing I want to talk about is how was this made? Because like I said, even after all of this testing, all of the scientists and the historians and all of the rigorous testing that have been done upon this piece of cloth, nobody knows how it was made. Their best guess is that it appears to have been made by an extremely high intensity flash of radiation. Can anybody say resurrection? We don't know exactly what happened when Jesus was resurrected, right? So maybe it involved a high intensity flash of radiation. So wow. Let me show you some scripture where we actually see the shroud spoken about in the Bible. How exciting. Okay, so this is from Matthew 27. So when it was evening, a rich man from Arimathea came, named Joseph, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him, and Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth. That's the shroud, folks, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut out in the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the entrance of the tomb and went away. All right, so hear about it there. Now, John tells us a little bit more details. So after these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one for fear of the Jews, requested of Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. Pilate granted permission. So he came and took away his body. Nicodemus, who we remember him from John 3, the Pharisee that met with Jesus, who had first come to him by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes. That's how we know about the myrrh and the aloes, about 100 liters weight. So that's a lot, I think. So they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen wrappings. That's the shroud. And with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now in the place he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden was a new tomb, in which no one had yet been laid. Therefore, because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. All right, now this is after the resurrection. Okay, Peter got up and ran to the tomb. And when he stooped and looked in, he saw the linen wrappings only. He saw the shroud. And he went away to his home, marveling at what happened. And as usual, John tells us a little more. So the two were running together. So this is talking about John and Peter. And the other disciple ran ahead faster than Peter and came to the tomb first. And this is John. He stooped to look in. and saw the linen wrappings lying there. That's the shroud. However, he did not go in. So Simon Peter also came, following him, and Peter entered the tomb. Leave it to Peter to just barge right on in there, of course. And he looked at the linen wrappings lying there, and the face cloth, that's the sudarium, okay, which had been on his head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but folded up in a place by itself. So the other disciple who had first come to the tomb also entered then, and he saw and he believed. And you know what? He saw and he believed. He saw the shroud. I wonder if he saw the image on the shroud. I don't know. There's no way to know that, but he believed. He believed that Jesus is risen. Hallelujah. Okay. So that is the scripture references that we have where I believe the shroud is mentioned. All right. So guys, you know what? Let's talk about the conference. 51 minutes later. Okay. So I have to start by showing you a little bit about where this conference was held because it was amazing. So this is the St. Augustine Institute, and it is in, like I said, it is in the St. Louis area, St. Louis, Missouri. It is specifically in Florissant, which is, strangely enough, where I grew up, where I was high school age and a little bit younger, and also Joe Marino. He grew up there as well, so interesting. So it is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. It's on 300 acres, wooded acres. It is right on the Missouri River. It is just amazing. Now, this was built by Boeing. So, and Boeing did not spare a single expense. They have probably sunk millions of dollars into this facility. It is lavish. It is gorgeous. It was just luxurious. And it was a wonderful place to have the conference. In fact, my husband, who worked for Boeing for 37 years, and before he retired, he went to this place many times because when Boeing owned it, they used it as a training center. But other people could not get access to this. They don't give tours, right? And so, at least they didn't when it was Boeing. And so I never was able to go there. And so he was so excited, my husband, when he found out I'm going to get to see this place. So last year, the Catholic Church bought this from Boeing. And so now it is being used as an institute for higher learning, for theological studies. So beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So it was a wonderful setting. Let me show you a few more pictures just so you can get an idea. Okay, so there's the institute is down at the bottom. Do you see that big mansion up toward the top? So originally, this whole property was owned by the Deloge family, a very wealthy St. Louis family. And so when they died, the last Deloge died, I believe, and then Boeing bought all of this property. So, but that mansion is still there, and they use that for meetings, and I think people can stay there, and they have events there as well. So it's just beautiful. Here you can see just the settings, and that was outside of the cafeteria. This is one of the conference rooms, and I attended a bunch of presentations right there. I sat right there in that chair right there. So anyway, this is glorious. And they have like about 3 miles of hiking trails, so I was able to, between some presentations, go, and I hiked the whole 3 miles. It takes you through right next to the river, and I took that picture. Just very, very, very beautiful. All right. So when I got to meet Joe Marino himself. So there he is, Joe Marino. So if you remember him from my interview with him back in April. So there he is, just a wonderful, very sweet man. I had him sign my copy of his book. So when he is on the team of people who organized this whole event, the whole conference. So very, very neat to meet him in person. Okay. I also met this man here who many of you might recognize. So this is Dr. Jeremiah Johnston. And so he was absolutely the biggest name, the biggest speaker at the conference, and he was there the whole first day. So you might be familiar with him, but if you are not, he is a well-known pastor, a New Testament scholar, a radio host, an apologist, and Bible teacher. He used to be a skeptic of the shroud, but he recently became convinced of his authenticity when he started looking into it. So he's been getting a lot of press lately because he's come out saying, I believe that this is the authentic shroud of Jesus. And so he's been on Glenn Beck. He's been on Michael Knowles. He has been on Tucker Carlson. That should be coming out this week. And so here I am with Dr. Jeremiah Johnston. So I will tell you, he's a phenomenal speaker. I went to every single one of his presentations. He just keeps you spellbound. He is amazing. So if you can catch him in any interviews, anything online, be sure and watch it because he's fascinating. But not only that, but he was an extremely humble, polite, and gracious person. The way he spoke about his relationship with Jesus, his love for Jesus just emanated out of him. And so you never know about these famous people, what they're like in real life. This guy's the real deal. I will tell you, he's amazing. And I believe that God has anointed him, and I believe that God is using him to help spread the message about the shroud to the world today. So just amazing, just amazing. Okay, so one of the things that I was very happily surprised about this conference was how Christian it is. How Christian it is, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that a little bit more clearly in a minute. But first of all, everybody who was at that conference. Oh, and there were probably about, I'd say, Tangelo, maybe you can help me out. I think there were about 500 people there, maybe. I had no idea what to expect. I thought there could be thousands. I mean, there were people there from all over the world. Okay. So, but I think maybe about 500 people there altogether. And so, and that included scientists and historians, shroud experts from all over the world. And then there were a lot of just, shroudies like me, just hacks who've been interested in the shroud for a long time. So anyway, that everybody there believes that the shroud is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus. Everybody. There were no skeptics. No skeptic is going to spend their money and their time to go to a conference like this. And so it was really neat to just be with so many shroud believers in one place. So that was really cool. And not just shroudies like me again. We had scientists, historians, Bible scholars, and others, people who have invested decades of their lives studying the shroud. I mean, some of them, it has been their entire life's work. And so, but yet even the most austere, left-brained, scientific kind of person there, they would still get teary-eyed when they talked about the shroud and what the shroud meant to them and why they've spent so much time of their life studying the shroud, because it indeed is the face of Jesus. And they believe that, they know it. And the marks of the blood on the body on the shroud perfectly match the story of Christ's crucifixion. And so the Shroud of Turin visually tells the story of Jesus. And I was just touched. I was moved to see the level of the faith of the people, the presenters, these very proper, prim, scientisty people. And yet they would break down and they would get emotional when they're describing what the shroud has meant to them in their life. And because of what it reveals about Jesus Christ. And so it was obvious that so many people there was a depth of faith in that group of people that was tangible. You could feel it. It was just wonderful. I mean, so many of the presentations were very science-based. They were very technical. It was the reason for a conference like this, part of the reasons. So, but even so, all of the presentations that I attended were deeply Christian, and the faith of the people there was very, very deep. And so many of them share their experience of when they first saw the shroud and how it has changed their lives because of what it conveys and what it proves. There was a traveling shroud exhibit, which was very interesting. So I took a bunch of pictures and I want to show you those so that you can see, kind of experience it a little bit. So let's see, here's my old face. So I don't mind that part, but they had a life-size image of the shroud. And so that was very moving. And so that's me in front of that life-size image of the shroud. And then they had somebody standing in front of it who would show everybody how to take your phone, and then you can switch your camera on your phone to inverted so that you could see the negative image of the shroud. So that was really fascinating. And I tried to take a picture of that, but then it just turned out to be a regular picture. So anyway, but that was fascinating. So here's some more images from that exhibit. So they also had a life-size bronze sculpture of the body of Jesus and the posture that it would have been in based on the image on the shroud. And so you could see that, you could touch it. All of the wounds and the scourge marks, everything were evident on that sculpture. So you could touch the hands and the feet and the face of the man in the shroud. So that was very moving. I spent a lot of time there. There's the face of that sculpture. They had a replica of the crown of thorns that would have been placed on Jesus's head. And on the shroud image, you can see the wounds and the blood from the crown of thorns. And so a lot of times you see that in artist renditions of the crucifixion, and it's just like a circle, like a wreath kind of, but it would have been, it's much more accurate that it was like a full crown that would have gone over his whole head. So many more thorns being shoved into his scalp. So, and there is probably close to what it looked like. You can see behind it is a replica of the Roman flagrum. That's that whip that would have been used to scourge Jesus. And you can see the two little metal balls on the end of each of those strips of leather. And just a very cruel torture device. Okay, and so this is on the left, you see replicas of the nails that would have been used for the crucifixion. On the right is a replica of the spear that would have been used to pierce Jesus' side. And then in the back middle is a replica of what the tomb probably would have looked like. So please disregard the scratched up old farmer lady hands there. That's my hand. And so I put my hand in there because I wanted you to get an idea of the scope, the scale. So the larger nail up at the top there would have been used for the feet, and the smaller nails would have been used for the hands. And so an interesting thing about the Roman nails is that they were square. And in the wound that we see on the foot of the shroud, the man in the shroud is a square wound. So just one more of so many proofs. So interesting. Okay, and this is a close-up of the tomb. And so you can see the three compartments, and then that on the left, the back compartment would have been where the body would have been laid. And so the shroud would have been back there. And so then the middle compartment, so probably Peter and John when they ran in. So when you see the steps going down, and then the stone that would have been rolled into place, they would have had like a track where the stone would have rolled along and then been put in place to seal the tomb. And so when Peter and John got there, the stone was rolled away. They could go into the center compartment. John stayed in the center and looked in. Peter just barged right on in, as Peter would do. So anyway, very, very interesting. So those are some scenes from the traveling shroud exhibit that was on display there. One of the most fascinating presentations that I saw during the first 2 days of the conference, and this was from Bill Lauto, Lauto, who is an environmental scientist and an energy consultant of all things. So you would think, well, what is he going to have to say about the shroud? This was fascinating. So he discussed how by using core samples from the bottom of the Dead Sea, they are actually able to gather core samples from the Dead Sea floor, and they can narrow it down to like each layer from the core sample, each layer of soil. They can tell what year that is from. Did you know that was possible? I had no idea. So yes, they can do that. And so they've been able to use core samples to get down to 33 AD, the year that Jesus was crucified. And they see evidence in the core sample of an earthquake during that year. And we are told in the Bible that there was an earthquake when Jesus died. And the stone was cracked, and people came back to life from the grave. Craziness. They have physical proof of that earthquake in core samples. They were also able to find from these core samples evidence of a dust storm from that same year. So a huge dust storm that would have left evidence in a core sample. So that would account for when we are told there were 3 hours of darkness. We're told that in the Bible when Jesus died. Okay, so we are also told from extra biblical accounts about the day of Jesus's crucifixion that there was a blood red moon, which would have been a lunar eclipse. So you cannot have a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse on the same day, right? So a lot of people have said, oh, that 3 hours of darkness was probably from a solar eclipse, but it could have been. So if there's a lunar eclipse, couldn't be a solar eclipse on the same day, but it could have been a dust storm, a big, huge dust storm that would have blotted out the sun for 3 hours. So that is fascinating. Also, they were able to go back and through the lunar calendars and discover that there was indeed a lunar eclipse on the day that Jesus was crucified, which was April 3rd in 33 AD. They know the day, and they know that, yes, there was indeed a lunar eclipse. There would have been a blood red moon. They also have been able to determine the temperature, and don't ask me to tell you how, but they can determine the temperature on the day that Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem. The temperature was around 105 degrees Fahrenheit. So really, really hot. And so the extreme heat would have contributed to Jesus's early death, because remember, he died before the other two men who were crucified on the crosses next to him. So it would have been heart failure instead of bleeding out. So, wow, I was just blown away by the things that these an environmental scientist was able to learn and tell about the situations. They can recreate the day in Jerusalem that Jesus was crucified. So just amazing. So there was a surprising topic that kept coming up. Dr. Jeremiah Johnston brought it up first, and then I heard many presenters talk about this, and that is that the Shroud of Turin can be used as a tool for evangelization. Honestly, I never even thought of that. That never occurred to me. I thought it was interesting, fascinating. It's very meaningful to me, but I never thought what it might mean to somebody who was not a Christian, and that it can actually be used to teach people about Jesus and to evangelize. So Dr. Johnston mentioned that in the Gospels, the Bible says that people saw and they believed. And remember, John, when he ran into the tomb, he saw and believed. And he saw the shroud. And so we have a visual representation, a visual image of Jesus Christ, so that, an actual image of Jesus Christ. So people today can see and believe. Wow. Somebody else stated that the shroud makes Jesus real. So another one of the presenters said that. So presenters told story after story after story of people actually coming to Jesus because of the shroud. Because especially these people who are more left-brained, more scientific, engineer type, brain type, thinking, these are people who need evidence, okay? These are the kind of people that an emotional appeal that works with a lot of people, that's not going to work with types like that. They need evidence. And I heard other presenters, these scientists, talk about that the reason why the shroud was so meaningful to them was because it is evidence. We got some hard facts and evidence in this shroud that proves many things about Jesus Christ. And so it's just amazing. It is God speaking through the shroud to a completely, different style of thinking, people who are more scientifically minded. So I just love that, because the gospel of Christ is for everyone. And the image on the shroud, it tells the story of Christ. It magnifies what we know about Jesus from the Gospels. There was another presenter who called it, the shroud is the first gospel written on linen, a companion to the Bible. And he said that the scripture is very understated. It's very understated. Just think about it. In the scriptures, they tell the story of the crucifixion in a few sentences. We don't get a lot of details, but all those details are filled in through the shroud, because we have a visual, an actual image of the brutality and the suffering of Christ that he underwent for us as he was going through. He endured all of this. We see in the shroud, we see his broken nose. We see his right eye swollen shut after being beaten. We see the scourge marks all over his body. We see the bloody gouges in his scalp from the crown of thorns. We see the bruises on his back from carrying his cross. We can see images of the bruises on his back. We can see the dirt on his knees and on his nose from falling on his way to Golgotha. And finally, we see the nail wounds and the blood on his hands and his feet. And we can actually see, again, the square shape of the Roman nail that pierced his feet, and the blood and the water that flowed from the spear wound in his side. And we can even determine the exact posture of Jesus, of his body, when he died. Is this not the most incredible miracle that we have from 2,000 years ago? We have an image of our Savior, Jesus Christ. One miraculous image. And this is the image that God has chosen to give to us. I mean, God could do whatever he wants. There's probably millions of ways God could have arranged to give us an image of Jesus if he wanted to. So what image has God given us? He has given us an image of Jesus's death, the reason he came. But it is not just an image of his death. It's also an image of his resurrection, because it was the resurrection process that created the image to begin with. So it is the full story of Jesus's redemption for us on Calvary, on this piece of cloth, and it has been protected and saved throughout history by the hand of God, I believe. And now is the time that this story is starting to get out to the general population. I mean, it's crazy. People are starting to talk about it. People who aren't even Christian are starting to hear about the shroud. And I believe this is the hand of God. And all of this extremely compelling evidence, everything that I'm talking about tonight, of Christ himself. And I did not realize this before I went to the conference. And that is that there, for many, many, many people, the shroud has been this final piece of evidence that caused them to come to Jesus Christ. There's so much power in that image of Jesus Christ. Another presenter called the shroud a controlled revelation of Christ through technology. So God is using technology, the way our culture is growing and changing through technology. God is actually using that to bring about more proofs of the shroud. And so what we are seeing now is that it is currently entering the world of popular culture with people like Glenn Beck, Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan has talked about it. So because all along, the shroud has always been it's been more well-known in the Catholic world, right? Especially in Europe. So for many Protestants, never even heard of the shroud, or actually dismissed it as, another one of those Catholic relics, right? Which, sorry, lots of Protestants think that way. In fact, Dr. Jeremiah Johnston confessed that that's the way he used to think about the shroud before he was convinced that it is authentic. But now today, it is opening up not only to Protestants and Orthodox, but to the world. And it's so amazing. One presenter even said that we are nearing that exponential curve of recognition. That is so, so exciting. So I'm going to end with this. So the most poignant moment of the entire conference from me was from a woman named Teddy Pappas. And she's a tough, no-nonsense criminal attorney. I loved her, but I wouldn't want to be on her bad side. Yet even this tough, no-nonsense lawyer, she broke down into tears as she was talking about the shroud and the deeper meaning that it holds for her. Someone, she's a cancer survivor, and her knowledge of the shroud actually, believe it or not, helped her as she was healing from cancer, as she was dealing with a cancer diagnosis, to just have that, because again, this left-brained, really, engineer type thinking mindset, and she needed proof. She needed evidence how meaningful that the shroud has been to her and her faith as she was dealing with a cancer diagnosis, and now she is cancer-free. Amen. Hallelujah. So, and she said that the shroud is God's divine testimony bearing witness to God's high priest, Jesus Christ. The shroud is the Holy Eucharist in another form. And she ended her presentation by tearfully declaring that the message of the shroud is this from Jesus. And I'm going to do the same thing she did. She held up her hands. She said, this is Jesus's message to us from the shroud. Here is my body. Here is my blood. And that is how she ended. And that's how I'm going to end tonight. So there was not a dry eye in the room when she did that, because how poignant, how meaningful. What we have on the shroud is the body and blood of Jesus. The body and blood of Jesus. It is just amazing. Thank you so much for watching Join Hands with Evan. I'm BlueTapp. If you have gotten anything at all from this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also like and share this video. That really helps get this content out to more people. And please leave some comments. I'd really love to hear from you and get to know you better. If you're interested in keeping up with me and my writings, please sign up for my free email list by texting BLUE, B-L-U-E, to 33777. And we'll get you all connected. God bless you richly, and I love you with the love of Christ.
Read My Demon, My Jesus, Blue's memoir about her suicide, out-of-body death experience, and her miraculous healing. Companion workbook, Chaos Calmed, is a guide to Christian meditative prayer and spiritual healing. Join Hands with Heaven, 6 prophetic visions, 1 event, 1 message. All 3 books available on Amazon.com.